Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Biology Bios. My name is Jim Edelman. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at the University of Memphis. And my purpose with this podcast is really twofold. First, I want to let folks know that most Thursdays during the semester, we have talks by visiting researchers at 4 p.m. in Ellington Hall. And that's folks from all over the country and world talking about the really cool biological research that they do. The second purpose is to have those folks here learn a little bit more about them, how they got where they are, and what really excites them about the research they do. In addition, I'd like to say a quick disclaimer that I borrowed these questions from Rhett Miller's excellent podcast called Wheels Off, so please check that out as well. But without further ado, let's get to this week's guest. Thanks so much for being here. Dr. Liz Carlen, thanks so much for being here, and welcome to Biology Bios.
Yes, thank you for having me.
So I generally start off with asking folks to just give a brief intro of where you are, like the elevator pitch of what you do, sort of the broad brushstrokes of what you're up to.
Yeah. So I'm Liz Carlen. I use she, her pronouns, and I am currently based at Washington University in St. Louis. So in the Midwest, despite having the name Washington, I am not in Seattle or in DC. So I'm about 4 hours from Memphis, and I broadly study urban evolutionary ecology. I'm really interested in this idea of how animals are able to survive in cities. What traits do they have? What characteristics do they have that allow them to survive? And then more recently, I've kind of been narrowing in on trying to understand how our human policies, things like environmental racism, how we're choosing where we put private neighborhoods, where we put private roads, how often our trash pickup is. I'm trying to understand how that is also influencing wildlife.
Excellent. Thank you. So following up on that, do you have a particular project right now or a particular aspect of that project that you're really excited about? And why are you jazzed about that?
Yeah, so there's a couple different things that we're doing right now. So I have genetic samples from squirrels all over St. Louis, and we're in the process of running landscape models to try to understand how different things might be influencing how these wildlife can move across the city. For example, I live on a thoroughfare that is 10 lanes, 5 lanes in each direction, but it's just a normal street. You know, I do live on the same street as the hospital, so there's lots of heavy traffic coming through. And I have lived here for over 3 years, and I never see roadkill on this street, which makes me think that wildlife are not crossing from the park that is right across my street to outside that neighborhood. They just can't cross this big barrier. Whereas if I drive on other streets, kind of in my neighborhood, you will see animals kind of moving across the street or as roadkill. And so, how do our human choices about where we're putting thoroughfares, not just highways, which has been one of the main things that we've focused on recently, but even where we're just putting streets and how much traffic is on that street, is influencing this wildlife dispersal patterns?
Very cool. Yeah. And full disclosure, I am from St. Louis, so I think I know the street that you were talking about right
Kings
there by
Highway.
Forest Park. Yeah.
Yep. I look over this beautiful park where the World's Fair took place in 1904. But there's tons of wildlife in that park. We have coyotes,
Yeah.
we have deer, we have turtles, and obviously raccoons and opossum and muskrats and squirrels. And none of that is making it across the street. And so why is that?
Yeah. I think there's a really neat behavioral component to all of this too, right? Like how are
Right.
they, what are the behavioral mechanisms that go into the animals learning about this, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's
And
super cool.
knowing not to cross that.
Mm-hmm.
And another kind of thing about St. Louis is it's it's one of these cities that does have private neighborhoods. And
Yeah.
so located all around Forest Park are these neighborhoods where if you are not a resident of that neighborhood, you cannot access that neighborhood. And despite the fact that we're all paying city taxes and I'm contributing to this local economy, I cannot walk down certain streets in my neighborhood. And so that also forces traffic even more so onto Kings Highway, onto this street, because the traffic can't go and cut through. All the traffic has to come down Kings Highway.
Yeah.
And so there's some policies in place that are happening in St. Louis that are also contributing to how the wildlife are able to disperse.
That's super interesting. And yeah, yeah, St. Louis managed to get in the news about that. Yeah,
Yeah,
not a good look, St. Louis.
right.
But sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. But
That's
I think
okay.
this is really neat that this highlights that you're at this interface, right, between not just biology, not just ecology and evolution, but a bit of sociology, a bit of urban planning. Like all of these things are in that Venn diagram where you're working.
Right. And for this field of urban evolutionary ecology is pretty new. I would say it's really taken off in the past 10 to 15 years. And what we found is that each city is kind of giving us different trends. And so we're trying to understand, why are we getting different trends from each city? And I think a huge portion of that is the social human component that shapes each city, the age of the city, how we have culture within the city, what is the dining culture outside? Do we eat outside versus inside at restaurants? I had a student who was working on pigeons in Madrid versus St. Louis, and one of the things that she noticed is there's much more of a culture of being outside and sitting at cafes. And that's
Absolutely.
something we don't have in St. Louis. And those little things contribute to people just like throwing out a little bit of food for the wildlife and therefore building up that wildlife population.
Interesting. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I find that stuff actually really fascinating. We ran a urban wildlife monitoring cure in the department the last couple of years, and some of the papers that we read, I noticed that you have written papers with Krishnell as well, and I think one of the things that struck me and some of our students is a potential difference between cities is where the wealth is concentrated. You know, is wealth concentrated in the urban center? Is wealth concentrated in the suburbs? And are there areas that are really not wealthy in the urban center versus in the rural? Or are there both, right? And that dynamic, because it's not necessarily a linear dynamic there.
Right. And it might be different city to city.
Uh-huh.
So in New York City, more impoverished areas are going to have less green space. They're going to be more paved. They're going to have fewer trees. But in St. Louis, more impoverished areas are going to have more vacant lots.
Yeah.
And that could be potentially really good for wildlife.
Yeah.
And so, again, it's hard to think about um, how each city is different, and there's not like one monolith of cities that we can kind of say, oh, this is what cities do. There's kind of this big understanding that we need of the city itself. And it's why I chose, when I moved to St. Louis, to actually live in the city proper and pay taxes in the city proper and vote in the city proper, because I'm studying the city and I feel like I need to be contributing to that. And it's unfair of me to kind of parachute in, which we don't often think about with cities. Oh, how are you doing parachute science in a city where we live in cities? But if you're not truly trying to understand all that nuance that's happening, if you're not read up on the history of the city, you could miss some potential drivers of the eco-evolutionary dynamics that are happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And identifying those like across cities, like from those big, broad surveys, like figuring out what commonalities like pop out. Like every city has its like unique things that you're talking about, but like maybe we can develop an understanding right? That's like,
Right.
okay, this factor that we see in these cities, this predicts XYZ. Or, yeah,
Right. And also understanding that if we implement this solution in one city, it might not work in a different city
nice point. Yeah.
because something is very culturally different about that city, or it just doesn't have these other dynamics.
Yeah. Well, all right. So I could nerd out about urban ecology for quite some time, but so part of the goal of this podcast is also to talk about like your journey in science and to have some advice for our students that might be listening. So I want to kind of ask you the general intro to that question is was there a time you knew you wanted to be a scientist? Was this like an aha moment, or was it kind of a slow burn? How did you arrive at that?
The exact moment I can picture myself, I think I was in second grade and I'm walking. We had science class was in a separate classroom.
Okay.
And so I'm walking to that classroom and I say to my friend, I'm so excited we get to have science class today. And she looks at me like I'm crazy. And I kind of like go inward for a second. It's like, wait, everybody's not excited to go to science class? And so it was that moment in my head, like I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. I want to be a scientist. And I didn't really know what that meant. I knew I didn't want to be a medical doctor and I knew I didn't want to be a vet. And so I was kind of confused about where I could go within science if I wasn't doing one of those two things.
It seems
But I
like you
knew
oh, sorry.
but I knew I wanted to work with animals and learn about the environment and be outside.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was actually going to say. Well, it sounds like you had this you knew like, all right, I like critters.
Mhm.
But then it's difficult, right? That you're good at biology, you like critters, you should be a vet, right? That's the like the
Right.
A plus B equals C a lot of the
Well, there
time.
also, I was not good at biology. I just want to
Oh,
say that.
really?
Yes. So, one of the things that I try to stress to my undergrads is um, I came from a high school background where I got a very good social education, but the academics were kind of lacking. It was not challenging for me. And, I took all these AP classes and they're like, this is just like college. And then I got to college and it was very difficult and I struggled. And I got a
Yeah.
D in my first biology class and I got an F in my first chemistry class.
Yeah.
And I thought about quitting college, science, everything right then. And I sobbed a whole bunch. Um, but really, it was that I wasn't good at memorizing things, that the way that biology was taught to me, especially in those intro level classes, was a lot of memorization, which I struggled with, especially because in high school, I could read the textbook the night before and then take the test, and I'd do fine in the class. And all of a sudden, I got to college and I really did have to study. I couldn't
Yeah.
read the textbook the night before. And so that was definitely hard. I was not inherently good at this. It was definitely something that I had to work towards. And once I started taking classes where I could see that they were field based, I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. I'm willing to put in the effort on these other classes so that I can take the classes that I really enjoy.
Nice. Yeah. And I think that's really important to hit that like what you're describing is not terribly uncommon. A lot of folks get to college and then it is just this. I mean, I felt this too, that it was just like, whoa, everybody here is really smart and I got to work hard. Oh my
Right.
goodness.
Especially when you graduated at the top of your class in high school and school has naturally come pretty easy for you. And all of a sudden, all those kids are put together at a university and it becomes much harder.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely agree. And I think there's also a thing there that I've talked to people that have had similar experiences and it's these early as you're, developing the vocab, which is so much memorization, like that it's hard for people to see that so much of science is actually creativity. seeing the next interesting question and coming up with that question. And that's a different muscle, right?
Hmm.
And yeah, I think that we have to work not to discourage people that do have that muscle,
Right.
and that want to flex that muscle. We need to not discourage them by chasing them off too early, like that's not
Right.
what the goal of those classes should be.
And it's really helpful to have that language that we've memorized to be able to talk about things. As frustrating as learning that language is, and it is learning a different language. And so
Yeah.
giving yourself some grace with that, I'm all of a sudden I have to learn all these new terms and what they mean. It's frustrating. And so giving yourself some grace in that, once you have those terms and you're able to communicate, it becomes so second nature. It is, again, like speaking a second language where you're like, oh yeah, how do I even translate this for the general audience, because I'm just used to using whatever the term is, pelage instead of fur.
All right. Yeah, throwing out just letters, FSTs, and
Yeah,
it, yeah, it gets jargony pretty fast. But I
it gets
also liked what you said about having the context of the field classes of like, oh wait, the vocabulary is so I can do these cool things. And
right.
making those connections is really important.
Right. And I was really lucky that I was able to find a mentor my freshman year. And he started taking me out in field classes. And these were very small 4-person classes where
Ooh.
we would go camping and, spend the night at the field station and everything. And I would pretend to be asleep when our alarm went off at 5 a.m. because I didn't want to actually get up and go out into the field. But as soon as I started moving, it was great. And we'd catch all these animals, and I was seeing things that I couldn't even imagine, and that a lot of my peers weren't getting to see. And I was getting to hold them and really get a deep understanding of this ecosystem that was around me. And that was really exciting.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's yeah. That some couple podcasts ago, someone was like, their advice was take field classes. I was
Yeah.
like, yeah, that's pretty good advice.
Yeah.
um,
And I still I consider myself a mammologist, and I still use my mammology class every single day. There's not a day that goes by that I'm not using something that I learned in that class.
cool. Very cool. Um, okay, so this one pivots a little bit. And we kind of touched on this at that when that transition to college where you didn't do well in those classes, and so we get all sorts of feedback like that. We get rough grades. We get as we try to publish, we get reviewers. So we get a lot of like outside criticism, but at least for me, there's also the inner critic that second guesses and says, "Yeah, you can't do that." Um, so I'm wondering, when that voice pops up for you, how do you silence it, or how do you maybe make it work for you?
Well, first, I'm in therapy and I'm taking my medication. And those have been two things that have been absolutely essential in helping me kind of talk through and think through some of these things. And I really like having a therapist because, unlike my family members and my friends, who I'm like, well, you have to be nice to me.
Yeah.
This is someone who's there to help me work through this stuff without being nice to me. And
And
so
yeah.
when they say you have a lot on your plate, I can go, oh, someone else is realizing I have a lot on my plate from an outside perspective. Maybe it's okay that I'm overwhelmed right now.
Yeah, I
So
think that's a really helpful thing for I mean, we advocate that for grad students, and like I'm right there with you. Like
yeah,
it's just so handy.
it's really, really helpful to have someone that's kind of outside your world that's there providing perspective and is still on your team, wants to give you tools to help you work through this. So I think therapy and then taking my anxiety and depression meds have been two really big things that have helped me. And I don't want anybody to feel shame around the fact that they're taking these things or using these tools.
No, and
And
thanks for sharing that here, like with everybody. I think that's super important that we do that and that we're open about that. And so thank you
yeah,
for doing that.
yeah. One of the students that I work with, one of the things that we're always like, have you tried this one? Have you tried this one? We're all talking about all the different anxiety and depression drugs that we've been on. Um, and again, to help remove that stigma around it. And that these are tools that I have in my toolkit to help me deal with all the things, because academia can be incredibly stressful, and a lot of us are these overachieving type A personalities that want all the rewards that we can possibly get, and need this validation from other people.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
sometimes I think about a joke in my head about like, did I just get a PhD to make my parents proud? And I don't think that's true, but there was something about getting a PhD that made them very proud that I'm very happy with.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so there's, all of those things are very complicated. Besides that, when that voice is kind of in my head, telling me, "Oh, you're not good enough." It's okay to not know everything. It's okay to ask questions. And I think one of the things that I've found as I've kind of moved through my academic career is just I had always thought that everybody else thought like me. So my thoughts were not original. And talking to other people made me realize, oh, wait, maybe some of this stuff is new. Maybe these are original thoughts. And when I start talking about things like how the street I live on might be a road barrier and how private neighborhoods might be contributing to that wildlife movement patterns, and other people haven't thought about that, I was like, oh, I do have some original ideas. That, oh, I guess I am kind of smart. Uh, and that being curious is kind of what has kept me thinking like, oh, these are new ideas that other people may not have thought about, or even if they did, maybe not everybody's considering them. So how can I bring my perspective
Hmm.
into this?
Yeah. I like that idea of sort of the community, like engaging with your community and asking lots of questions, right?
Right.
That's that's
Which
how
is what we
we
do.
grow, right? Yeah.
And that's what we do as scientists is we're asking all these questions, trying to create knowledge, which is not something that's easy to do. And so if we can just get these little morsels of knowledge that nobody else has figured out yet, that's really exciting.
Hmm.
And that's probably one of my favorite things about being a scientist is I am being paid to create knowledge, to learn things that nobody else knows about the world.
Yeah. 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 It's pretty, when you frame it like that, it's a pretty good gig, isn't it? Um, you also kind of talked about this a bit, but I want to ask explicitly what advice, if you were considering yourself as an undergrad in sort of some of the situations we've talked about, working in today's world of biology, I know it wasn't that long ago, but what advice would you give that version of yourself, the early 20s version of yourself? What advice would you give that person?
Get lots of experiences. So you don't know what's kind of going to strike and be like, oh, this is what I want to do, or I'm really interested in this. So gaining those experiences, whether through volunteering or field classes or going to different internships, all of those are going to help kind of shape what you know and figure out that path that you want to go down. I I took up a lot of opportunity. We had a lot of optional field trips in my classes or things where people were making things like making up assignments, and the professor would say, if you're interested in this, you can just come along. And so even though they were very early mornings often, or it meant giving up my whole weekend, I was doing all of those things because I liked it. I wanted to see and gain more experience with the field.
And yeah, like you said, you never know what, like when inspiration's going to strike, what you're going to learn on one of those experiences that like just propels you in a really exciting new direction.
Right. And as I want to be transparent with these undergrads, that I took time off after undergrad and I worked as an administrative assistant in a social science institute. Who would have ever thought that a decade and a half later, I would be combining social sciences and biology? It felt very tangential at the time to be working in the social science institute. And yet here I am incorporating everything that I was doing in that institute into the biology that I'm doing now.
That's very cool. Yeah. Yeah. I love that diversity of experience and pulling in. It's, to me, some of the most exciting science is when you do just that, when you're merging. It could be something from like a physics equation that nobody's ever thought of applying to biology, and it's been around for decades, but there you go. There's something new just because you like had this diversity of experience.
Right, right. And I got many interactions with people in social sciences and the diversity of social sciences, which I never would have understood having done a strict biology undergrad, master's, and PhD. I
Hmm.
was very entrenched in the biology. So having those couple of years in the Social Science Institute, I think I gained a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, very cool. Um, okay, so what do you do when you are not sciencing?
So my third place, I don't know if you've heard this term, but this idea of you have home, you have work, and then you have like your third place. So my third place is my dog park.
Nice.
And I got my dog when during the pandemic, when we were all stuck at home. And I had never had a dog before, and he has just become the light of my life. And he comes to the office with me every single day. He does field work with me. He travels with me. When I go to a conference, he comes with me. And I every evening we go to the dog park. We spend about 2 to 3 hours, so quite a bit of
Wow.
time
Yeah.
at the dog park. And he has his dog park friends, and I have my dog park friends, and I absolutely love it. My friends there range in age from 19 to 85. And
Yeah.
so there's this broad range of life experiences and people doing many different things. And it's just this wonderful group of people that all love dogs.
Well, so what kind of dog do you have?
So I have a Westie. So
Oh,
he's
cute.
about 18 pounds, very, very tiny, short little legs, scruffy fur. And his name is Finn after the Star Wars character FN 2187.
Ah, cool. All right. That's my kind of nerdy right there.
Yeah, yeah.
I have full disclosure, I am also a dog person. And unfortunately, my current dog is not a very good dog park dog.
Mm,
Um, yeah, she's so unpredictable about who she likes and who she doesn't like. I wish I could be like, oh, she doesn't like small dogs or she doesn't like big
mhm.
dogs. It's just like she just has some dogs that she's just not into.
Yeah, yeah.
But
This has been it's been a very nice thing. And I can work at the dog park. They have Wi-Fi, and so I often go there and work. Uh, and if my students need some relaxation, we'll all go to the dog park and
oh, I
hang out
love
with
it.
the dogs. So I think that having animals just in general in our lives is a really good thing.
Yeah, very cool. All right, so final question is there a question that you wish I had asked you that I didn't ask you?
Not so much a question, but just this is going to sound like really weird advice. And maybe it's not the best for undergrads, but I'm going to let undergrads kind of wrestle with this in their own. One of the things that I wish someone had told me was to quit sooner. So again, type A personality. I want to succeed. I want to show that I don't fail, that I'm great at everything. And that's true. There are some things I could have quit undergrad when I got those bad grades, and I didn't.
Right.
And so I don't think that I should have. I'm glad I did not quit then. But there were years that I was trying to do experiments during my master's that just kept failing. And I was like, no, I'm going to get this to work. I'm going to get this to work. And the experiments just kept failing and failing and failing. And I would change one little thing, and all the things that you're supposed to do, tweak one process, one element, and rerun it. And I wasted thousands of dollars, and I wasted so much time, because at that moment in time, we didn't have the technology to answer the questions that I was trying to answer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think kind of realizing, like, what is your sunken cost? Are you just not quitting because you've invested too much in this? Or are you able to push through? How much have you really tried at this? And I think that's a situation that everybody needs to kind of assess on their own. But I had always been given this advice: don't ever give up. Don't ever quit. Don't ever give up. And in science, sometimes we just don't have the technology. We don't have the means, whatever it is. Now is not the right time. And so not giving up, but pivoting is a way to still achieve that, whatever the goal, the outcome is. But for me, it felt like failing when I was pivoting. And it's not. That's part of science. That's a huge part of science, is being able to pivot in different directions as you come across different barriers.
And there's like an optimality thing there, that is really hard to grasp coming into grad school, because I felt that same sort of binary as you. Like, if I don't do the thing that I said I was going to do, I have failed. And it's like, you could do a 14-year PhD. You could come up with the new technology, and you could spend, I mean, if you had the money to spend, you could spend oodles and oodles of money, like, getting this thing done. But you could have done something actually cooler if you had been open to making that pivot.
Right.
Yeah, that's really good advice, because everybody comes up against these brick walls, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, sometimes you can go over them, sometimes you can jackhammer through them, sometimes you can't. At least not without an incredible investment that you're not willing to make.
Right. And maybe whatever it is, that jackhammer is just going to cost $1 billion.
Yeah.
And we don't have $1 billion in science.
Yeah.
So let's walk down the wall to find that door that we can go through.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. That's really good advice. I like it. And thanks for sticking with that metaphor there. I love it. Well, Liz, Carlen, thank you so much for taking the time here. I'm super excited for your talk. It'll be great to meet you in person. And yeah, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks again to my guest, Dr. Liz Carlen. You can check out her talk on Thursday, November 7th, 2024 at 4 p.m. in Ellington Hall. Hope to see you there, and thanks so much for tuning in.